Hey guys, Matthew here. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the new Atlas and all the new Keystones. Now, in terms of the Atlas setup, nothing has really changed. There hasn't been any real significant nerf other than maybe the change to the Shadow of Hunger being a 30% instead of a 50%. But the rest has stayed mostly the same. Now, there's been the addition of a lot of these block mechanics, which I want to talk about. And of course, the Keystones, which is what the video is mostly going to be talking about. Now, in this video, there's going to be timestamps, so you can look at any specific keystone that you'd like more information about if you don't want to listen to the entirety of the breakdown of all of them. I will say right away, I haven't made like 17 million different trees for you guys because I think that the main way to go about building a tree nowadays is to basically pick and choose the mechanics that you want to be farming based on your character and based on what you enjoy first, and then build the tree around those mechanics. This is the way that I would personally go about building my tree. So I prepared only two different trees, and they're the ones that I personally think are the best, one for mapping and one for bossing. And I'll be talking about a little bit at the end why those are the trees that I went with for those specific, play styles, if you will. So let's just go ahead and start off with the bottom here, and then we're going to move towards the top. So there's been the addition of Dance of Destruction and Wellspring of Creation. So essentially, these guys are about making monsters either harder or easier to kill. And therefore, if you make them harder to kill, they will actually have less HP. And if they will do more damage. And if you make them actually easier to kill, they will have more damage. So the idea is that pretty much every single build in softcore should be going for Dance of Destruction, especially early on, as damage is essentially one of the best source of defense in softcore. However, if your build is already pretty squishy, then that might not be a good idea, especially if you're playing something like a melee build or whatever. And then, of course, you'll have like the opposite, which is Wellspring of Creation, which is for potentially more like hardcore builds, where they don't mind taking a little bit longer to kill the monsters, as well as it means that they're safer. So that's kind of the situation here. You'll see that Dance of Destruction is something that I go on for a lot of my trees going forward. Next, we have the block mechanics, which I think is really cool. There's been an actual chart on Reddit that popped up with how many blocks you can actually go ahead and block until you get to the point where you're getting less value than if you're to not block. And essentially, it's like 8 or something, or 6 or something. Which basically means, if you look at it, each of these nodes right here, and there's 10 of them, represents a different league mechanic. And if you decide to block it entirely, right, by taking the node, you will never see breaches on your map again. For example, if you were to take Dimensional Barrier. However, every single other league mechanic, which is listed below, from Abyss all the way down to Tormented Spirits, all of those would get an additional 2%. So if you do the math on this, you're blocking one mechanic, which has a base chance of about 8%, and you're adding an extra 2% to way more than 4 mechanics, which means you're getting overall way more mechanics on your maps to naturally spawn. Now, the cool thing about this is that there's a lot of these mechanics that are very bad in a league start scenario, Breaches being one of them, Legion being one of them. Right, the problem with Breach is that it doesn't really reward you until you get the actual Sextant, which is going to allow you to force Sheila Breachstones. So then it actually gets really good to have a lot of breaches on your map. But before that, in a league start scenario, breaches are not very rewarding. Or looking at something like Legion, it's not really that they're not really rewarding, is that most builds are not going to be capable of actually clearing Legions efficiently. So we don't want them. So blocking them would be a good idea, right? It's also really cool because if you block a bunch of mechanics, it means that the mechanics that are left over are going to have a very good chance of spawning. Now, this is cool for people who want to do some sort of out and going of maps with, fairly minimal investment or very minimal investment and very low maintenance, and still get some of the better mechanics such as Harvest, right? Harvest, if we look at last league, the only way that you could force Harvest on every map, of course, because it wasn't on the map device, was via the Sextant, which would cost a lot of currency, which meant anybody who wasn't absolutely min-maxing and very aware of how to take advantage of Harvest as a league mechanic basically didn't have access to Harvest unless they naturally found it once in a while. Now, if you block a bunch of mechanics and you keep Harvest and you take all the 1% chance of this 4% node, and you also take Stream of Consciousness, which gives you another 50% to the base, which is like 8%, you get to the point where you have somewhere, I believe, around a 39% chance to spawn a Sacred Grove on your map. And this is with 0 investment. So this is really, really strong. Of course, for some mechanics. Now, it's kind of the same sort of situation with the expeditions. You can get to the point where you have a very good chance of getting expeditions without actually having to worry about buying scarabs. However, expedition scarabs are relatively cheap compared to, say, for example, sextants for the Sacred Grove. But the fact that we do get the map device mod for 12C means that this strategy that I just mentioned, where you'd block everything just for harvest, is maybe not necessarily as required this league. However, knowing that you're not going to need the actual Atlas or the actual Xana mod or Kirak modifier on your map device for 12 chaos means that you can use it for something else, which obviously this league is all going to be probably essences. So that's kind of the situation with these nodes over here, where the idea is that you can block things that you really, really don't like, and you'll see when we go over my mapping tree why I made the choices that I made. Okay, otherwise, I think I can just type in Keystone here in order to... No, I guess I can't. In order to easily find them. So after these two, we have a Twist of Fate. Your corrupted rare maps and any Atlas missions, mapping crafting options and scarabs apply to them are modified unpredictably. So this is for solo self-found, put it simply. As a Trade League player, you should never ever be using this, because the idea with this node is that you can use bad investment in terms of scarabs and stuff like that to turn it in potentially good ones. But when it comes to softcore, when it comes to Trade League, or not necessarily softcore, but Trade League, you typically don't want to be caring about running the bad stuff. You only want to worry about running the good stuff, which is in line with your actual Atlas strategy, whatever that is. So in reality, this is a node that you should never, ever, ever take. All right, Shadows, Shaping, and Singular Focus are very interesting. I'll be coming back to those. Valley of Darkness, rare monsters in your maps have one additional modifier. So this is going to be a way to stack more head-hunter mobs quicker, due to the new Arch Nemesis modifiers being added. It's also going to be as part of one of the challenges where you have to beat monsters with 5 additional 5 Arch Nemesis modifiers or whatever. So overall, this is going to be a good way to just juice, because rare monsters have their quantity and their rarity affected by the amount of modifiers on them. So having that one additional modifier means that you're just going to get more juice out of your maps. Of course, this also means that they're going to be harder to deal with. They'll deal more damage, they'll be more tanky, etc. Okay, next, we also have Wrath of the Cosmos. Now, this is one of the strongest node in the game. Eldritch Currency has 25% chance to be duplicated for each altar used in the area. Very good. 25% increased damage for each area, for each Eldritch altar used in the area. Now, this might be a problem when paired with Dance of Destruction with the additional 25% more damage. So you might want to consider that, because, you know, monsters are going to be hitting you harder and you'll be taking increased damage. But again, softcore, you've got 6 layers of defense via your portals, so that's up to you. But the 25% chance for lesser and greater Eldritch Currency to drop as grand currency instead is really insane. That means that T6s and T5 basically, or technically it's T3 and T4 currency drops as T2 instead. That's pretty huge. Realistically speaking, that's pretty huge. So this is a very, very strong node, and it's also nice because it actually pairs with Eldritch Gaze. Eldritch Gaze gives you Eldritch Altars have an additional downside. It doesn't say that it's specifically Eater of Worlds, and this one doesn't say that it's specifically Searing Exarch, which means you can actually stack both. And this would mean that Eldritch Altars have an additional downside, but 50% effective upsides. So let's say, for example, you're getting, I don't know, 3% Scarab drops. Now it would be 4.5. Let's say you're getting 3% for div cards to drop. Now it'd be 4.5, right? Stuff like that. So it's going to be pretty huge, and over time it's going to add up to a lot of currency. Okay, next we have Stream of Consciousness. Now this one is your maps cannot be modified by fragments. Your maps have 50% more base chance to get extra content. Now this is really strong early league when you won't necessarily have the money to buy up all the fragments that you would need in order to force a strategy, like for example, Expedition, like I was talking about, or Breaches or Legions or whatever it might be. And the extra 50% is actually quite nice, especially if you're blocking a bunch of other mechanics, because in the end, it's only going to multiply the base chance, which is like 8%. So in reality, this is like saying 4% more chance to to spawn any of the content that you see on over here, from Abyss all the way to Tormented Spirits. So it is pretty strong, but it's not a node that I see as being super endgame viable outside of, say, Alkengo people who are going to be doing things like boss rushing, for example. Like the inability to use map fragments basically means that you can't target farm any specific strategy, because pretty much everything is going to require scarabs and sextants when it comes to endgame farming strategy. Okay, now there's also shadow shaping and singular focus, and there's these are very interesting. In my opinion, shadow shaping is the better node, because maps found in areas cannot be your favorite maps, does not cull your maps, it's just going to remove them from the pool, I believe. So the idea is that you can actually favor maps that you want to block, and this is going to be very good for natural high tier maps. And due to the mechanic of where your Atlas is going to snapshot your void stones upon opening your map, and then you can remove your void stones by easily control clicking them with the added quality of life feature. I believe last league or the one before, I can't exactly remember, but the ability to easily shift click your void stones means that you can snapshot all of your sextants on your map whenever you open it up, and then you can open up your Atlas, remove your void stones, and then basically the maps that are going to drop in that map are actually dynamic. They're not static to when the Atlas snapshot happens. They're dynamic, which means you can actually force specific map tiers to drop. So if you wanted to farm, say, a natural T15 or a natural T16, you could actually favorite all the other T15 and T16s which you don't want to be farming with this. Put in all your 4 void stones, use your your scarabs and your sextants and all your juice and all that. Set up your map, open it up, then open up your Atlas, remove all 4 void stones, and you've got a map which is going to be fully juiced, snapshotted, and then by removing the void stones, it's going to only be able to drop a natural T15s or T16s, and since you're blocking all of the other ones, you're essentially going to be guaranteeing that you get the map that you are farming. And not only are you guaranteeing that, you're not going to be removing any maps from the actual drop potential, right? Because it's not going to be culling maps, it's only going to be if you will, removing some from the actual pool of potential maps to drop. So I think shadow shaping is actually the better node as long as you're farming a natural high tier map, because then you can do the voidstone snapshotting. Next is singular focus. Maps have a 200% chance to be favored maps. Non-favorite maps found in your Atlas drop as basic currency. Now, this is basically going to be for the people who want to farm a map which is not a natural high tier. So let's just say that your map is a T4 and you can increase it to a T16 using 4 void stones. Then singular focus is going to be the way to go, as you won't be able to use the shadow shaping strategy that I just mentioned. So essentially, natural high tier, always go shadow shaping, otherwise go singular focus. People are saying that potentially this node could change, for example, a cartography scarab into like a fine delirium orb and all that, but that's just no. No. Simply put, no. You're never going to drop enough maps in a map to make this worthwhile. If you think about a really juiced map, right, even with cartography scarabs and all the juice in the world, it's probably going to drop you a handful of maps at most, and most of the time it'll probably just drop you a few, because map drop scaling is not that good. And what that means is that if you're turning a lot of those which are non-favorited into basic currency, which is going to be maybe a couple maps per map being turned into basic currency is a wisdom scroll. It's an alteration, right? Like when you think of people who used to farm Nemesis 4 currency or Nemesis 3 sextant, every single rare that they killed dropped them 3 additional basic currency. Now we're looking at over the course of an entire map getting maybe 3 additional basic currency. It's just not good, and that portion of this node is not good. What's actually good though is the maps found of 200% more chance to be your favorite maps, because it means that the vast majority of the maps that you do drop will be your favorite map. Okay, I think I've spoken about this one. Spoken to Wrath of the Cosmos and Eldritch Gaze, both 2 very, very solid notable. I think every single tree which is going to be a farming based tree, a farming map, sorry, and not bosses, should be getting these 2. It just doesn't make sense. The Maven influence is never going to be anywhere near as good. And the cool thing is that these 2 nodes, while they do stack, this means that you would have either one of the Eldritch bosses as your influence on your map, but now you can have multiple influences on the same map, which means you could have an Eldritch map, right? Say an Eater of Worlds influence on your map, and you could also be running a Conqueror map with influence from that Conqueror, which gets pretty wild when it comes to juicing, especially when it comes to the additional martial forces in the equation. Okay. Going forward, we have Grand Design. Small Atlas passive, grant nothing, 1% pack size per allocated notable. So the idea is that you'd cull all of your small passives for 1% pack size per allocated notable. I think this is only really worth it if you went with a tree which is going to have like all the notables ever, even if they're not good, just for the sake of adding more pack size to your maps. But overall, the reality is that small passives are actually quite strong, especially when it comes to map sustain and stuff like that, but also when it comes to pack size. If you're pathing through these 2% effective non-unique modifiers on your maps, 2% effective modifiers on your non-unique maps, I should say, this is pack size. This is the equivalent of pack size. It's a multiplier to the effects or the affixes on your map. So this is already going to add a lot of pack size and whatnot. So I don't think that this is ever really going to be worth it. I think that small passives are actually quite good. Think about it. All these 1% quantity you would be culling, those would all be gone. All these chance for map drops to be duplicated would be gone. All the 2% additional connected chance would also be gone. All the small nodes, such as, for example, your percent chance to get different league mechanics, or your additional monsters, for example, from here, right? The 30% additional monsters from Abyssal Depths, from Abyss. Those would all be gone, every single one of those. All you would be left with is notables. Now, to be fair, notables are the strongest portion of any of these clusters, but still, there's a lot of things that come along with the small nodes as well, and I don't think that, realistically speaking, you should really ever make a tree using Grand Design. And it's even worse when it comes to Wandering Path. Notables grant nothing and 100% effective small passives. I know that people are going to theory craft that you can probably push like 80 quantity or something crazy, but it's bad. Simply put, it's bad. Again, notables are always going to be where you're going to get the most of your value on your tree. And if I ever see a tree with Wandering Path on it, I'm just going to call it for what it is, and that's bad. It's just, yeah, when you do the math on this, the numbers just don't add up, and it's kind of sort of the same situation for Grand Design. It just doesn't really add up. Okay, next we have the Thirst for Knowledge, which is the Uber Searing Exarch node. It's going to give us new uniques, which we don't know anything about in terms of drop rates and stuff, but also Eldritch currency has 50% chance to be duplicated. So the actual super high, the T4 Eldritch currency, I can't remember the name, the highest one that drops, which is exceptional, I believe, is going to have a 50% chance to be duplicated, and it was already, prior to these Uber version of these bosses, fairly consistent drops. So we'll see if the drop rate actually increases once we make them Uber, and then also the duplication makes it even better. So overall, if you plan to farm Searing Exarch, you should be able to, you want your character to be able to do it as an Uber version, and that's going to be the case for pretty much everything I'm about to talk about. Same sort of thing with Insatiable Appetite, which is the exact same situation, 25% chance to drop an additional exceptional. So instead of a 50% chance to duplicate, it's a 25% chance to drop an additional one, which I think is actually going to end up being roughly the same amount, except, seen in a different way. This one's going to be more consistent. This one's going to be more like you won't get some, all of a sudden you'll get two. This one is just going to be more like you'll get it all the time. Again, we don't know about the new uniques that are going to be dropping necessarily from this guy, or the drop rates. Are the Uber version going to have a higher chance of dropping, say, the Omni Amulet, or say the Ashes of Stars? Probably, and that means that you'll always want to be doing them. However, of course, if your character is not capable of doing them, you'll want to stick to the regular version or sell them to other people who are. Okay, the Perfect Storm, Cyrus has a 20% chance to drop an Awakened Support Gem. So for those who don't know, Cyrus lost his ability to drop Awakened Support Gem last league, and they went to Maven instead. So this gives some of it back, a 20% chance, and it's a flat percent, which means you'll end up with, one every 5 Cyrus you'll drop an Awakened Gem. It's not great. I think that might actually be worse than what it used to be prior to this new Atlas, but that's because Maven is the main source of Awakened Support Gems now. Not to mention, you'll probably also be getting additional new rewards from this Uber version, and potentially better of the old rewards as well. Now, Momento Mori, I think, is going to be an incredible node for people farming things like the Feared, who are going to be doing, very, like, many Cortexes over the course of the league. Veneris drops 3 additional rare items with 3 less common synthesized implicit modifiers. So he drops 3 items already, and they're synthesized, and they all have 3 synthesized implicits, which means you're getting 9 implicits, 9 additional implicits per Cortex, which is not that much when you consider that when you complete a Cortex, you're already dropping literally hundreds of synthesized items when you have the entirety of this tree. But the thing about it is that Cortex is now level 85, which means some of those items are going to be 86 instead of Cortex being naturally 83, and most of these items being 83 or 84, which is huge because 86 bases when it comes to synthesize can add an insane amount of value. Put it in perspective, if you were to drop a Hubris Circlet and it was item level 82 or 83 with a non-curse effect or from your skills, right, as a synthesis modifier, maybe it would be worth 10 or 15x. If it's item level 84, which means it can roll T1, some of the T1s, I think percent ES or something, it's literally worth 50x, right? It's worth triple that of a non-84. And 86 is going to be able to apply to like body armors and shields, the ability to roll T1 suppression, the ability to roll T1 life, and stuff like that is going to be pretty huge. And getting 9 less common synthesized implicit modifiers means that insane bases that we've probably never seen before, or that have realistically, historically been incredibly rare, are going to be a lot more reasonable now. Things like bows with +1 arrow, quivers with +1 arrow at item level 86. There was only a handful of that was found in the entirety of the duration of Arch Nemesis League. So I can't wait to see how this is going to turn up over time, as I'm going to be farming a lot of Cortexes myself. Okay, next we have Captivated Interest, 25% more Crescent Splinters found in the Maven's Crucible. So for those who don't know, Maven's Crucible is any of the invitations. They're all called Maven's Crucible. 25% effective quantity. Now these are probably going to be multiplicative with each other, right? You'll take their baseline Splinter and then you'll multiply it by the quantity. So basically, let's just say that your invitation has 70 quantity. Now this is going to make it 95. It's going to take a look at the amount of splinters that it should drop and multiply by 1.25. This is going to be pretty insane. However, all bosses releases at once means that your build is going to need to be able to actually deal with that, because that's a pretty big deal. Think of the Fear, for example, is already a pretty hard encounter. Now all bosses are released at once is going to make it that much harder. Throw the Gauntlet, Absence of Mercy and Empathy is level 85. Now Absence of Mercy and Empathy is basically Maven. The Maven's powers are unreleased. The Absence of Mercy and Empathy, in the Absence of Mercy and Empathy, and then the Maven drops an Elevated Sextant. So this is going to guarantee you that if you do a Maven, you'll always get a guaranteed Elevated Sextant. This is pretty good. It means that overall Maven is going to be a more consistent thing to farm other than just for the Awakened Gems, especially later on in the league. Pretty much this is probably going to be the new baseline for farming Maven if you're not capable of doing that, because the price of the Maven invitations are probably going to be based on the fact that you should have this node. If that's not the case, and it's not priced on that, and it's priced regularly like it used to be, and Elevated Sextants are also remain the same sort of value that they used to have, then the funny thing is that essentially you're going to almost be making up the full cost of your Mavens every single time just from the Elevated Sextant. Not quite, but almost, which is pretty interesting. Okay, next we also have Height of Hubris, which is 100% effective modifiers on your invitations. Now this is probably going to multiply with Captivated Interest. So remember that 70 quantity Fear becoming 95. Well, I'm pretty sure this is going to basically multiply that 70 to 140, and then it's going to add the 25, which is going to make 165, and then it's going to look at the amount of splinters that it should drop in 165 quantity invitation, and then it's going to multiply that by 1.25. I think there's a situation here when in fully juiced Feared, you're going to be dropping 2 full Maven's Writs or more. This is crazy. Yeah, this is absolutely wild. Of course, though, 100% effective modifiers means that your invitations are going to be significantly harder, and then pair that up with all bosses released at once, and you're going to have some insane endgame bosses encounters, or I should say, endgame invitations. Okay, next we have Cosmic Wounds. Shaper Realm is level 85. The Shaper and the Elder are full power are unleashed in the Shaper's realm, so this means that it applies to Shaper and that it applies to Uber Elder. The Shaper and the Elder in the Shaper's realm, which again would be Shaper by himself or Shaper and Uber Elder, have a 100% increased chance to drop an Orb of Dominance. Now, they didn't have a very good chance to drop an Orb of Dominance, sadly, which means even with this node, it's not going to give you that good of a chance of actually dropping an Orb of Dominance, but there are some new uniques which are going to be tied to the Uber versions of every bosses, which means, again, you'll probably want to be doing that if you're capable. Inevitable Ambush is the old Guardian's Aid, so there's nothing to really talk about there. When you get an actual Guardian to 33% life, they're going to respawn with an ally who has a chance to drop their fragments. It's about a 50% chance. So basically, every single time you do a Guardian map, you have a 1.5 value of you have basically 1.5 Guardians map worth of value per map. That's kind of how it is. So that's pretty much the actual look at all the actual new Keystones. Now, I think that this is going to add a lot of potential to the Atlas, both in terms of farming maps, both in terms of bossing, especially the bossing content is going to become pretty insane, and I can't wait to see how this goes. Now, before I end the video, I do want to go over a couple trees, one for mapping and one for bossing, and explain the decisions that I made. So this is going to be my early game tree for mapping. As you can see, there's 14 points left. Well, actually, you can't see, but there's 14 points left, so quite a bit. Now we're going to be focusing primarily on the Eater of Worlds the Eater of Worlds influence due to the Shadow of Hunger. 30% chance is quite strong, but you could easily go the other side to the Searing Exarch if you wanted to be on this side of the tree. Now, the mechanics that I decided to go with essentially are things that require no time, things that I can easily click on, get my currency, and get out of the map, and then also a couple mechanics which I'm going to be getting for free with the Stream of Consciousness and the blocking of other mechanics, and those other mechanics that I'm going to be getting for free are going to be my, if you will, high-paying mechanics, which are not going to be forced in any way, due to the fact that, of course, Stream of Consciousness is there. So the idea is that every single map you're going to be using essences on your map device. And I know that a lot of people are going to be using essences on the map device, but guess what? A lot of people use essences on the map device last league, and it was still extremely profitable, so I don't see a problem there. The idea is that we are going to use the 3 Chaos Essences modifier, plus the free essence that we get from the tree. We're going to get an insane amount of essences from our maps, which are going to be very consistent money. Next, we are also going to be getting a lot of the nodes in regards to heisting for blueprints and contracts. And this is a note. This is an actual league mechanic that we are not going to be blocking. And this is again going to be just a cash. We're going to click the cash. We're going to get our currency from the contracts, the blueprints, and whatnot, and the rogue markers. And we're going to sell all that. And it's going to be very consistent, low income, but low effort. Right, literally 0 effort. Next, we are going to have a lot of blocking of mechanics which we don't actually care too much about getting, especially when we're trying to speed up our map. Breaches, Abyss, Legions, Metamorph is not that bad, but Mirror of Delirium, Blight Encounters, Rituals, those are all things that are going to slow us down, so we don't want to be stopping for them. Instead, we want to actually try to increase our odds of getting the mechanics that we do care for, such as Sacred Grove and Expedition. So with this tree, we're going to have somewhere around a 35% chance to get either an Expedition or a Sacred Grove, which means every 3 maps you're going to get a free Expedition and a free Harvest. What this is going to allow us to do is that most of the maps are going to be very, very quick. Of course, we're going to be utilizing altars in every single one of those maps as another very consistent way of making currency from the bases, but also from the Eldritch currency and from the altars, from all the varying the various rewards that we're going to be getting. We are going to be using Shadow Shaping, and we are going to block every T15 and T16 map that is not Park, and then we are going to use the Voidstone Snapshotting that I talked about way earlier in the video to get only Park maps to drop. Now, why Park? It's a very small map, and it's a very large map. So unlike a small map like, say, Atoll, which could be very good for this strategy, as it would be very easy to farm, to find the actual harvest. The thing about Atoll is that it's not a particularly wide map, so depending where your expedition actually spawns, you can lose a lot of value to your expedition and have the inability to really clear the entire thing. By doing this and by blocking every map that is not Park, and of course there's also the exception of Burial Chambers being an actual T16, you could leave that on your Atlas to actually sell it to players. However, I don't know how map selling is going to go this league, as it seems like sustaining maps is going to be extremely easy. But anyways, so Park is a very wide map. It has a pretty decent boss, which doesn't have any phases or anything like that. You can easily one-shot it. It doesn't have a layout which you're going to be confused by or get lost in. You can basically do the entire square and then go in the middle, and that's it for the clearing of the map. So very, very efficient in terms of the map layout as well. And again, it's a wide area, which means it's perfect for expedition. And because it's a very small map, it's perfect for harvest. I do think that this is going to be probably the best currency related atlas for early mapping, as long as you know how to actually utilize harvest to maximize profit. Now, the downside of this atlas is if you don't know how to maximize harvest to make money, or if you don't know how the Expedition League mechanics work and you don't intend to use your reroll currencies in your artifacts, then there's probably going to be other atlases which are going to be better. Now, I think that there's a lot of nodes on the atlas right now which are bait. Things like Harbingers are just bad. They don't really give you any sort of value. They do add juice to your maps, however, if you're doing, say, daily maps and you're trying to juice up your rewards and whatnot. But as a individual mechanic, they're just not very good. And I see literally everyone taking them. Now, to be fair, they are pretty decent for map drops, but Expedition is also pretty decent for map drops. Harvest is not horrible either, because it gives you a bunch of master missions and stuff like that, which is not exactly maps, but can be essentially turned into maps from I guess indirectly, if you will. But this is going to be the atlas that I think is the #1 speed mapping atlas, especially early on, before you go into like some more juicer atlas. Obviously, these two atlases that I'm talking about right now are going to be linked down in the description of the video. And then after that, there is my bossing atlas. Now, the idea of this is very simple. We're going to maximize getting master missions. These are going to be useful later on. So that's why I'm getting these master missions for Alva and June, even though bossing isn't going to be utilizing these two mechanics. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of free stuff, which is hopefully going to allow me to make a little bit of currency as I'm progressing my atlas. So I'm grabbing, obviously, the essences. Every single map should have essence on them if you're not doing anything else in terms of higher end strategies. We're going to be grabbing the free Strombox, which is not going to add a ton of value again, but it's going to be that much, that much more. We're going to be grabbing Shaping the Mountain and Shaping the Seas. This is in order to actually go through Atlas as fast as possible and not have issues with sustaining maps. Of course, when it comes to bossing strategies and your Atlas, when it comes to bossing, is going to be supplemented, I should say, heavily from the actual scouting reports that you're going to be able to buy from other players, and then using key rack missions. Then we're going to head upwards and we're going to grab all the Uber bossing stuff, because the idea is whatever you decide to farm as your Uber boss, you're going to have the nodes for it. So if you're farming the Feared, for example, well, you'll want to have this, you'll want to have that. And then this is not going to be, none of the rest of the stuff is actually going to matter. But let's just say you want to farm Cyrus for a day. Well, this is there. You want to farm Maven. You want to farm any invitation. This and that for invitations, for Guardians anyways, Elder and Shaper. And then, of course, if you want to farm the Uber Searing Exarch or the Uber Eat of Worlds. So this is going to make sure that you have everything required at all times when it comes to bossing. Because realistically, this is what matters. The early stuff is just about getting you through the Atlas by wasting the smallest possible amount of time, but still giving you a little bit of currency as you're going through. Because obviously, if you're not making any money at all in your maps, it's going to be hard to buy the upgrades that you need to get by the time that you do end up where you're capable of farming these invitations, right? By the time you get to that endgame status, if you have no money to buy upgrades on your build, then you'll be stuck. So these essences and these strong boxes are kind of there for that. And of course, we're going to be grabbing Dance of Destruction in order for the monsters to have less life. They deal more damage. That's okay. You've got your Cast on Death portal set up, hopefully in your league starters. So that's kind of where we're going with that. That's pretty much my entire breakdown of the situation when it comes to the new Atlas. Hopefully this was informational. Now I'm going to go ahead and say a huge thank you to my supporters, as always. So Jaden and Rocky, Max, Mist, HKMZ, Thomas, Mass, Mercury, Solo Monk, Alex, the Great Master, Nick, Tim, the other Alex, Nailed, Talismar, Anto Drago 99, Vaith, and Bitizen, as well as, of course, anyone else who has supported me in the past, anyone else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this Atlas tree breakdown, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.